What's up, movie fans? James Patrick here with another ranked video for you. I apologize. I am so behind in ranked videos. We have so many new videos to put out from the Final Girls list, from the Nightmare on Elm Street movies to this film, which we're kicking off our Hellraiser series. And of course, we got to do a Final Girls of the Hellraiser series. Probably should do like a best ends in the Hellraiser series. I just watched all the Texas Chainsaw Massacre films, so we have a whole series of videos to do on that. And I'm just about done with the Final Destination films because they just dropped the trailer of the new Final Destination. Hey, it's a good time to be a horror movie fan. So in today's video, we are going to be ranking all of the Hellraiser films. I was very excited to watch some of these. One, because I was such a fan of the earlier installments. Two, because I saw the massive decline in the direct-to-video installments, but still found a few gems in there. And three, I hadn't seen some of the more recent ones that were released. So it was my chance to get exposed to the latest and maybe greatest in the Cenobite universe. 12 films in total, and we have 10 films that were a part of the as much as of a linear canon that you could have, I suppose. In Hellraiser, you have the four first films, um, all the direct-to-video sequels, and the reboot from 2022, which is the 11th film. And then the 12th film is they recently had released a work print version of Hellraiser Bloodline. And that was the one I was most curious to see. And if you're interested in me doing a difference video between the original theatrical release of Hellraiser Bloodline, the work print release of Hellraiser Bloodline, and the original screenplay, which Peter Atkins did release and publish, I could do that video as well because I did pick up the screenplay and read that, and it's fascinating to see the difference between these three versions. But I did include the work print version in this list because it does change really the scope of the Hellraiser Bloodline film. All right, but as we do in all these videos, we start at the bottom, the worst Hellraiser film. And I'm curious if this is the worst for you, but it's Hellraiser Revelations. My one sentence review of this film is: somehow a high school film class got the rights to the Hellraiser franchise. This has the quality and the look, the feel, the acting bandwidth of a high school production. It is unbelievably bad. The worst Pinhead, the first time Pinhead was played by someone other than Doug Bradley, who chose not to return to this, worst Pinhead that you could ever fathom in a Hellraiser film. The dialogue felt very much like a ripoff of some of the best lines from all the other Hellraiser films. They also included the found footage trope. This was one of a series of videos that Dimension did just to retain the rights to the Hellraiser IP. And it's very clear they did not care about quality, story, character, or really what the audience would think about this movie. This was embarrassingly bad. All right, moving up one stop to number 11, we have Hellraiser Hellworld. I believe this is the 8th installment in the Hellraiser series. Yep, 8th installment, and the final of the 3 films that director Rick Boda did. Boda, I'm not sure which it is. This, Rick Boda's final one, and the worst of the 3 that he did. This one had this very complex, confusing meta approach where Hellraiser is an online game because somehow that needs to be incorporated into this. And the online game still has Doug Bradley's voice and image and look, but yet it's also a real thing. It was very unclear how they were connecting this imaginary game that all these young, very attractive people were playing. And if you know anything about gamers, they are all extremely photogenic and very, very in line with young Hollywood actors. Terrible premise. It really crammed in a desperate Lance Henriksen cameo as if that was going to save this. Um, Abysmal characters, really poor effects. It felt more like a torture film than a Hellraiser film, and I know Hellraiser has elements that are very torturous. This leaned more into a Saw-esque movie than a Hellraiser film. Also, I thought this was interesting. It was the final time that Doug Bradley portrayed Pinhead, and it was the only film I saw where Pinhead used an actual man-made device to attack someone. He used a cleaver to attack someone, like Jason would attack someone or Michael Myers would attack someone. But he's never had to do that before. He just kind of looks into corners of the room and chains with hooks fly out. He's never had to implement a man-made device to attack someone. I thought that was just such a poor understanding of the character. And I know for some seasoned viewers of Hellraiser, you think, well, he grabbed a hook off his belt in part two to go after Dr. Chenard. Yes, but that was his tool. He didn't just pick up a cleaver off a counter and go after someone. Oh, that was a rough film to watch. All right, moving up to the top 10 is the second of the three Rick Botta films, and that's Deader. Um, each one of these just gets worse and worse. So this was like a little bit better than Hellworld, but not much better. Um, Pinhead has just such a weird role in this. The whole premise of this is an undercover reporter, which, as someone who's been a journalist, no reporter works or operates this way. Clear story and script issues, a lot of continuity issues, really rough acting. And they really leaned into CGI in this film, which is so perplexing because the entire predication of Hellraiser was on practical effects, not CGI. And this just shows how poorly CGI is used in this universe. On top of that, it was just a boring movie. It's just not that interesting and not that clever. All the Rick Botta films and really all the direct-to-video Hellraiser films, they kind of like shoehorned the Hellraiser universe into a script that could have been completely outside of the Hellraiser world or universe. And this one kind of has echoes of that. Like you could have seen this script being for a movie that had nothing to do with Hellraiser, and the director or producer thought, or the studio thought, well, let's just tag on the Hellraiser IP onto this idea and see if we can homogenize those two things together. All right, let's get just a little bit better. We're into the top 10. Hellraiser Judgment. I had not seen this one before, but this was one that was released. For me, it was released on Netflix. And I saw it drop on Netflix. I was like, that's interesting. That's not Doug Bradley, but it sure looks better than the Hellraiser Revelations Pinhead. This one, my one sentence review is, boy, it looks like they gave the graphic department keys to run the whole movie. And then I found out that that's exactly what they did. The person who ran the graphics and the effects for the film that came right before this one, which was Revelations, was then made the writer and director of this movie. And it's clear because there's no substance to this movie really at all. They took the idea from Hellraiser Inferno and just rehashed it. So we don't have a new premise. We don't have a new concept. The cinematography is really rough. A lot of fast cuts, blurred focus, a lot of pointless gore. Once again, just because this was being run by an effects person. You have a discount Doug Bradley, who is not the worst Pinhead. Like the person who played him is not atrociously bad, but is just surrounded with a bad script, bad characters, a very obvious ending that we see coming, and just not that interesting of a film in general. So like all these films are like really, really, really bad. That's why they're all at the bottom. But we're not getting that much better. Like we've not done leaps and jumps in improvements between any of these. I would not say any of these are rewatchable in the bottom of this. Next up at number 8, we have Hellseeker. This was the first of the Rick Botta films. They brought Kirsty back for this movie, or the character Kirsty. and played by Ashley Lawrence. And what a waste it was to bring back Kirsty for such a rough direct to video film. This was the second direct-to-video one they did. It took the formula that was predicated in Part 5, Inferno, which is Pinhead is in the background. You have this whole storyline playing out that is more of a murder mystery noir concept, and all of a sudden Pinhead shows up at the end to narrate and give a voiceover exposition of everything that we've been watching over the last 90 minutes. In fact, there's so much exposition in this. This movie is at least 35% flashback exposition. We see so many flashbacks in this movie. This is clearly a low budget film. Uh, Rough on the editing, a lot of fast cut editing, a lot of really peculiar cinematography decisions in this. The thing that I think bothered me most about this movie is the color grading of the film. The film is just so green, as if they just toned down the magenta in every scene. It's just not fun to watch. Dean Winters does fine. He does okay as the lead protagonist, but not someone you really care for or have any interest in seeing what happens to them. And like I said, they just kind of waste the return of Ashley Lawrence's Kirsty. All right, moving up. All right, we're getting a little better. We're getting a little better. Hell on Earth, which is the third film. Um, I remembered this film a lot more fondly than I actually scored it in the rewatch. This movie, unfortunately, does not hold up. The acting in this film is the biggest point of contention I have. This gives first read through vibes. The actual release sounds like it's the first read through, the first time these actors are reading these lines. That's the vibe you get from this. It definitely breaks the canon that was established in parts 1, and more specifically in parts 2 on the formation of the Cenobites and the role of the Cenobites. And also, it just introduces the dumbest, absolutely dumbest Cenobites, from a bartender Cenobite to a DJ Cenobite to a cameraman Cenobite. Everything about this movie just screams I was made in the 1990s. Now, on the positive side, Doug Bradley showed up to work. Doug Bradley absolutely crushes in his performance as Pinhead in this movie. They gave him so much range, probably because there was nothing else to really like in this movie. And so they just gave Doug Bradley free range to just be the character Pinhead. And they gave him the space. He took the space. And Pinhead is delightful to watch in this movie. I saw some critiques online saying, oh, there was too much Pinhead in it, but this was a fun portrayal of Pinhead. It's the rest of the movie that I think I really struggled with. All right, moving up to number 6, we have Hellraiser Inferno. This was the first DTV. And what is clear about this movie is that this was not originally a Hellraiser script. I really don't see that. This was a script that was written as a murder mystery noir thriller, and that they then pinned the Hellraiser IP onto it, so that Dimension could keep the rights to the Hellraiser IP. Now, that being said, it's not that bad of a movie. The noir concept works fairly well. The detective angle is not uninteresting. The acting is pretty decent. The effects are not bad for a low budget direct to video film. The faults come really in two things. One, there's just a ton of voiceover narration. That's just lazy writing. There's so many easier ways that you could have used to show the viewer what is happening versus just having the lead character explain it in a voiceover. But two, the ending doesn't land. It's a kind of weak, well, here you go. We're just kind of going to go for low hanging fruit in this ending. I don't want to spoil in case you haven't seen it, even though it's been out for 20 years. But the ending doesn't land. It's unfortunate. The rest of the movie is actually not bad. I would say it's still enjoyable to rewatch. There's still elements that are very interesting about this movie, and it doesn't actually really have that stain of being a direct to video film that its following films did, like Hellseeker, Dead or Hellworld, especially. This still feels somewhat authentic to being a reasonably produced film, and an interesting story. So I would put it at number 6. All right, we're moving into the top 5 is the 2022 Reboot. I was so excited. I love the trailer for the 2022 release and when it was going to drop on Hulu. So the second this came out, I immediately watched it more than once. Um, let's start with the negatives. This film is really dark. Not dark in the sense of the story or the script, just the film quality. It's really dark. It's really hard to see what's happening in a lot of the movie. And that's unfortunate because there's a lot of really good practical and makeup effects in this that are just not visible enough to the viewer. You have a very cliche bad guy who is just overtly cliche. You know what's going to be happening. There's not a lot of shock and surprise when it comes to that person. The characters struggle, especially in Act One. It's not clear what any of the characters' motivations are, particularly the cliche bad guy or the who we find out to be like the secret henchman of the cliche bad guy. It's unclear what their motivations are, why they're doing any of what they're doing, which makes it hard to really care about any of these characters. Now, that being said, the portrayal of the characters gets increasingly better as the film goes on. Acts 2 and 3, you really start to get a sense of who these characters are, and you develop a better connection with these characters, especially in Act 3. You actually care about the remaining characters that are left in the film. Um, I do like that they added more context to the lore of the lament configuration. They added stages to the box. Each stage represents um, a different meaning or symbolizes something unique. Uh, but to get to the third act, it's a very slow moving film. Not a lot happens in the end of Act One and through most of Act Two. Um, Back to positives, like I said, the practical effects and the makeup effects were saying the Cenobites they created for this were so good. I love how they modernized the very 80s S&M look that the Cenobites had and then had for every film thereafter. They adjusted it, they modernized it, they really put thought into each of the designs of each of the different characters. I just would have loved more screen time for some of these Cenobites and maybe film quality that wasn't so dark so we can actually see them a little bit. All right. Moving up from there, number 4, we're into the top 4 now, is Hellraiser Bloodline. I remember like when this movie came out, the laughing about the premise of, the idea is you just send your killer to space when you're done with the franchise. And, it's like Leprechaun went to space, Hellraiser, Pinhead went to space, Jason Voorhees went to space. But there were elements about this movie that I saw promise in upon first seeing it, and I would come back and watch, and there are certain elements that I would just want to focus on more than others, like the characters in France, in the at the beginning of the film, to the characters during modern times. The Angelique character specifically was so good. And you just had this feeling that there was so much more. Then years later, you learn that the director pulled his name off of it because of massive studio interference and that there was so much more that this story was supposed to be. And then you start to see that, oh, there's missing puzzle pieces to this. Um, the things that I'll say about this release, the theatrical release, is you have pretty interesting characters from, John Merchant, played in 3 different time frames. The massive scope of this movie is really impressive that we are going to predicate a film in 3 different time periods from, um, early France to modern times in America to, a future in space. And we are going to connect this family line through these three different um, uh, time areas. You have really clever characters, specifically the Angelique character I really liked. I like the merchant character. The cinematography and lighting design I thought was really good. Um, I liked the balance where Pinhead is a character, but he is not the primary character, that you have different characters with different motivations. I thought that was really interesting. Um, but there was still a lot to be desired in this. And that's when I discovered there was a Workprint release that was recently put out. And so I got my hands on the Workprint release. And that is where we go with number three, is the Workprint release of Hellraiser Bloodline. The thing that, and like I said at the top of this video, if you want me to do a difference between the theatrical release, the Workprint release, and the original screenplay, I would love to do that because I got my hands on all three. But the thing that improved in the work print is, one, better pacing. They showed the movie chronologically as opposed to jumping back and forth. The other big thing that they did was they decreased the reliance on the space, Pinhead in space, and that being the anchor of the film. In the theatrical release, they used the space element in the beginning, the middle, and the end, where they kind of kept coming back to it and were using the characters in space to narrate or to give exposition of what happened in France or what happened in America. But that's not what they did in the actual workprint version. The workprint version spends time on each of the first two areas. It spends significantly more time in the first one and a bit more time in the second one, the first one being France, second one being modern day America. It also gives a better explanation of the Angelique character and why she has motivations that are somewhat in alignment with Pinhead, but also in contrast to what Pinhead is trying to do, and how both Pinhead and Angelique have different approaches for how they are trying to either work with and really more so manipulate or control John Merchant and what he is doing. So, that being said, all of a sudden we have a much more interesting and robust story with characters that you can dive so much more into, so much better structure, so much more motivations for the characters, and just a better overall viewing experience. So I'd put Hellraiser Bloodline, the workprint version, at number three, which takes us to our final two. Number two is Hellbound Hellraiser 2. If I were to make this list before rewatching everything, I probably would have put this one number one. I, growing up, had more fun watching part two. And I think the reason I had more fun watching part two is because they allowed the Cenobites to have a little bit more context than they did in the original. They expanded the lore of the Cenobites and their role and how they're created. um, that being said, a lot of flashback exposition. I mean, you see so much of the first movie just shown scene for scene in the second film for no real reason. There's a lot of details that Kirsty couldn't have known that she's now espousing in the second film, like calling them Cenobites. She did not know that. There's no reason she could have used that word because this takes place immediately after, like minutes after the first one ends. It also struggles with character development, where the first one I thought did a really good job, where you get a sense of who everyone is and what they're about. This one, you don't really know some of the new characters, and thus you don't care about the new characters. The Dr. Chernard character just felt like a plot device. He didn't really seem to do anything or change anything except for helping to move the plot along. And I feel like you could have had this movie without that character and allowed Julia to be the main antagonist and had a much more succinct, focused story that would have been really, really fun to watch. Um, it's a bit campier than the first one. It's a bit softer than the first one, in regards to some of the, they try a little bit of humor in it. That being said, It's still a really fun movie. I still rated it very highly. I really enjoyed it. This is a movie I've rewatched innumerable times, and a solid number two in this list, which leads us, of course, to the original. I mean, right off the bat, what a brilliant score in this movie, this operatic, loud, booming, multi-layered score to this film that just raise it like goosebumps all over. Really strong, as I mentioned, really strong, effective character development. You understand who Larry is. You understand who Julia is. You understand who Kirsty is and how their motivations interact with each other. You understand who Frank is and how he fits into this really crazy, messed up family dynamic. The practical effects in this movie are still outstanding, and how they achieved some of the things they did even back in 1987 on the budget that they had is absolutely mind-blowing. This is such an original film. It's still a scary, terrifying movie, and most importantly, this movie still holds up. Where so many films can feel antiquated and feel like they just worked because it was that time and that place, the original Hellraiser still holds up as a terrifying exploration of forbidden taboos and desires and the consequences of seeking these things out. So there it is. There's a list of all 12 Hellraiser films, which includes the workprint release of Hellraiser Bloodlines. I'm curious how your rankings coincide with mine. If you had anything a lot higher up or a lot lower, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Put in the comment section below. As always, we appreciate your subscriptions, for sharing this video with a friend. Thank you so much for tuning in. I appreciate each and every one of you, and we'll talk to you all in the next screening. Take care, everyone.